2020 meeting of the Walpole School Building Committee to order. And with that, I will turn the meeting over perhaps to you, Brian.
Yeah, we have an agenda we can share.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll share. Patrick, can you make me a host?
Say it again.
Can you make me a host so I can share? Sorry.
Hello, very much. Thank you. Are you last name?
Cuddy, CDBD1.
And what's your birthday?
Let me know if you want me to pull anything up, Ryan.
Yep. Can everyone see the agenda?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Brian Jarvis with Compass, along with Tony Pina from Compass, and tonight we also have Charlie Hay from Capay Architects to give you an update on the project, the middle school project. So the agenda is, I don't know if there's any public participation. I think this is all through Walpole Media Television. We'll recognize that. And then the approval of prior minutes, Mark. We have minutes from the March 10th meeting, and also we had a meeting on July 28th, but there wasn't a quorum. So we do have minutes from that, but I just don't know if that's considered an official meeting. But the March 10th meeting minutes. Are here if everyone would like to review them.
So if people want to take a look at the minutes, I'd accept a motion to approve the minutes. Maybe it's separate motions for the July and March meetings.
Right, so at the March 10th meeting was a review of the request for designer services. We gave an update and then gave a draft overview of the ed programming process and the visioning services done by David Stevens of New Vista Design. Those are the minutes. We approved the contract for New Vista Design to bring David Stevens on ahead of the architect at that point. And we approved the request for designer services that then went out and eventually procured Capay.
So do we have a motion to approve the March 10th, 2020 meeting minutes?
I would make the
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
second.
All right, very good. We have a motion and a second. I believe we need to take a roll call vote on these
That's
Zoom
correct.
meetings. So so let me go down the screen as I see it. Mr. Fisher, how do you vote?
Yes.
Let me scroll back up here. Patrick, are you an official member of the committee, or do you have?
No, I'm not. And I don't have any.
Okay, didn't think so. Mr. Senek, if I could have your vote, please. Okay, very good. Dr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher, are you an official member of the committee? I forget.
Yes.
Okay, what's your vote?
Yes.
Very good. Moving up here, pardon me. I'm missing somebody here along the way. Mr. Connor, what's your vote?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Very good. Mr. Morganwick?
I'm not sure if I'm a member or not at this point.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I don't think you are, come to think of it.
Yep.
And who am I missing? Mr. Anderson? Donnie Anderson, do I have your vote? We'll come back to him. Mrs. Gayositz?
Yes, I would just note that on the last page, it says the meeting adjourned at 7:18, and then below it says at 6:18, so I would just correct that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Mr. Fisher, Jeffrey Fisher, your vote?
And this is the March meeting, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Approved.
And Ms. Santiago Taylor, your vote, please?
Yes. Approved.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm not sure if I missed anybody as I'm scrolling through here. Nancy, Mrs. Gallivan,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Did I miss any? Oh,
Susan Lawson's here.
yep. Okay, Mrs. Lawson, how do you vote?
Say again?
How do you vote on the meeting minutes?
I voted to approve them.
Okay, very good, thank you. I believe that's everybody. I vote yes, so the vote is unanimous. Can I get a motion to accept the July 28th meeting minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Mr. Connor, your vote, please. You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Connor, please.
Sorry about that. I vote yes.
Okay, Ms. Giositz,
Approve.
very good. Mr. Anderson? Up there, Mr. Senek?
Yes.
Very good. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Shield?
I don't remember.
Okay, very good, sorry. Ms. Santiago Taylor? Ms. Santiago Taylor?
She wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, very good. Ms. Lawson?
Yes, approve.
Mr. Connor, got Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
And Mr. Frisha?
Yes.
Dr. Goff?
Yes.
I believe that's all of us. I vote yes as well. It's unanimous, and we have a vote. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Yeah, it'd be great. So the agenda is, after the minutes, we're gonna go through the project update. We'll talk about the feasibility study stage, which we're currently in, and specifically the preliminary design program, PDP, which is the MSBA deliverable, which is the first deliverable to the MSBA, and the status of all of those components, which include the evaluation of the existing conditions of both the Byrd Middle School and the Johnson Middle School buildings and sites, the educational program that Dr. Goff will talk about, space summaries, which is an MSBA tool that drives building size based on educational program and enrollments. And we'll look at, we'll discuss both the 450 and 905 enrollment options. Charlie Hay from TAPE will lead that discussion. We'll also take our first look at some initial design concepts, meaning how do those space summaries and the size buildings that come out of them fit on the particular site. So we're basically just looking at preliminary footprints, possible configurations, site layouts, et cetera. And that'll be the start of looking at concepts as we move forward. We also have some community outreach feedback that we'll talk about up in the educational program portion. And then we'll take a look at the project schedule and some of the major milestones moving forward. It is going to be a busy several months. And then we do have invoice packages that have gone out over the summer. And the last one being in September. I think this committee will start approving those on a monthly basis. Just so you're all aware, they do go to Mr. Frisha. He has been reviewing them on behalf of the meeting, and he can probably speak to those. We can just go through them quickly tonight. And then we also want to just confirm before we leave the upcoming meeting schedule for this committee. As I mentioned, it is going to be a busy couple of months coming up, and we want to make sure that we get these meetings on the schedule in advance as much as possible so we can get information out to you all in a timely manner. Any questions on the agenda? Okay. Moving on to the presentation. And if everyone could just mute their mic, but feel free to hop in if you have a question while I'm going through this. I mean, feel free to ask a question. We'll take some pauses in the middle of certain aspects before we transition if there's any questions. So we went through this agenda already. So project update since the last time this committee got together. Over the summer, the project team has been working intensely on looking at the existing conditions at both the Byrd and the Johnson site. The Byrd in more detail at this point than the Johnson site. Compass did provide an overview of the project and an update to the school committee meeting on September 10th. So we got a status meeting for the school committee and their audience, as well as a projected timeline moving forward throughout the fall and some of the important meetings that the school committee is going to need to have regarding ed program and the size of the building. We also held a community forum on September 23rd, which is again a project update for the public hosted by Mark and Dr. Goff. We did receive some community feedback, which we'll share as part of this presentation tonight. I believe you all got copies of that presentation as well as the results of the community feedback that was sent out in an email to this committee. So we do have that to look back on, and we'll touch on some of those aspects tonight. We completed the third visioning workshop with consultant David Stevens, who's working with the Ed Visioning. So he's been instrumental in working with the staff of both middle schools and the administration and going through some of the things to think about in designing a middle school, both now and for the future, some of the current trends in the way buildings are laid out to meet some of the educational needs. So that final workshop was on the third workshop was on December 1st. And we'll get those notes out to you. But a lot of that visioning workshop is what's driven putting together the educational program and some of the ideas and concepts for new spaces in a future middle school. School committee also talked about the project at their October 8th meeting. They brought up the topic of a possible consolidated enrollment simply because those are some of the options that we're looking at, and to get people understanding that that is a key decision that's going to be made in the near future, and that a lot of input and feedback is needed to get us to that spot. And the biggest aspect of the PDP, or the preliminary development plan, is the draft of the educational plan, which is what Dr. Goff has been working on tirelessly with her staff, basically spelling out how the school currently operates, how they deliver curriculum in Walpole now, and how they want to do it in the future. And those lead to space summaries, which Charlie's going to talk about, and also some of the initial design concepts. So it's been quite a busy few months since the last meeting in July. And we'll step through some of this as a refresher. And you guys can ask some questions. So overall timeline for the MSBA, the update bar has been updated here to about October. We're currently in the feasibility schematic phase, and the first deliverable is submitting the preliminary design plan, which is the PDP. And the goal is to get that into the MSBA by the end of next month, November 20th. That is really the compilation of all the pieces of existing conditions and the initial concepts. The next deliverable we'll do in February, which is the preferred schematic report. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The preliminary design program, which we're working on now, the PDP, really consists of several key components. The biggest one being the educational program. This is the document that Dr. Goff is going to talk more about. Initial space summaries, how does that program translate into square footage? Evaluating existing conditions and facilities, which we've been doing all summer and into the early fall. Any of the site development requirements that might be required of those particular sites. And then the preliminary compilation and evaluation of alternatives. The MSBA, as you recall, is requiring 7 basic concepts to be looked at for this project based around the 2 enrollment numbers. The 450 single school enrollment, so looking at a renovation of the existing Bird building, an add reno to the existing Bird building, or possibly a new standalone Bird building. The other option, based on a consolidated enrollment of 905, which was approved by the MSBA, is to basically look at a consolidated middle school, either adding on and renovating the Bird building or building a brand new consolidated building at the Bird site, or adding on and renovating the Johnson building or building a brand new combined middle school on the Johnson site. So those are the 7 basic ones. We're also going to look into just the renovation costs of the Johnson. They requested that just for informational purposes, but those are the 7 main solution scenarios, of which there'll be multiple concepts related to some of those scenarios. And the key to remember with the PDP, which is due, we're trying to get this into the MSBA by the end of November, is that there aren't any decisions at this point. They're just getting all the options, or as many options out on the table as possible, and then we'll start to refine those options as we move into a preferred schematic report. High level on the preferred schematic, which is due into the MSBA by the end of February, the 2 key takeaways there. One is you're going to actually make a decision on the enrollment. Which way does the town want to go for the enrollment of the middle school? Do they want to look at a 450 student school or a combined school up to 905? Because that's going to drive the options that get a little further development, that eventually get evaluated and narrowed down to what the MSBA calls the preferred solution. The preferred schematic report is the submittal that goes into the MSBA that highlights this is the one option that the district would like to move forward with and move into schematic design. So that decision needs to be done by the end of February, and obviously a precursor to that is a decision on enrollment. And we'll talk about a timeline for that later on in the presentation. A little more detail on the PDP and some of those components. The ED program Dr. Goff is going to talk about, and these are some of the key things that go on during that. We completed the 3 visioning workshops that help support the drafting of that document, and we held a community forum also to get some input from the community members. The initial space summaries, Charlie's going to talk about that, and then evaluation of the existing conditions, facilities, and site. We already looked at that. And we're going to look at a few concepts tonight. Charlie will walk us through some early concepts for possible layouts of the 2 sites. And just quickly on existing conditions, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Goff. So we have a full survey of the Bird site for now. We've not done one on the Johnson yet, but that is a possibility if there's a decision to move forward with the school on that site. Geotech was completed at Bird. The initial takeaway and preliminary findings that it would not require, it doesn't appear that subsurface improvements would be required in the Bird site. The information that came back on the borings and test pits that were done were favorable, and that will be more refined as we get into design, but right now the preliminary results are favorable. Hazmats, we did asbestos containing material surveys of both buildings. No major issues were found outside of what typically might show up. We referenced HERA reports that the school has on file, as well as doing investigations. And then obviously we'll create an appropriate budget if abatement is required as part of any project. We also did a phase 1 geo-environmental survey at the Bird site, and no major issues were found there, referencing historical records for that site. So some good news on the initial investigations at the Bird site. And then the building, TAP A's team did a full walk of both buildings, both from mechanical, fire protection, and structural. Obviously, mechanical and fire protection systems were considered basically beyond their useful life, which I don't think is a surprise to most people. I think there are some pieces of newer equipment, but most of it is older and possibly outdated. Structural for both buildings, no major issues that were discovered there. However, it was noted that given the construction of those buildings, the concrete construction of those buildings, that it could create some difficulties in modifying that. But then seismic improvements and also changes to support the building code related to seismic would also be required in both buildings as part of renovation, and that gets all baked into the design. Any questions on that general timeline or updates before I turn it over to Dr. Goff to talk about the educational program? And you might be on mute. Okay, we can come back to the timeline later if you have specific questions. All right. Bridget?
Thanks, Brian. So part of the feasibility study under MSBA is to write an education program. And as Brian mentioned, it's a comprehensive, it's about 60+ page document that what it does is it articulates the district's education goals and needs. So in other words, it establishes this comprehensive and thoughtful program that helps us to provide some future flexibility to adapt to what we call the changing needs and the changes in programming or teaching structures. But what's important is you want to make sure you sustain that over the useful life of the school. And we consider all the potential adjustments or improvements the district could realize within this proposed project. And it also enables us to work effectively with Compass, TAP A, and other stakeholders to really develop or evaluate and select a design that really supports our objectives and our needs for the middle school. Next slide. So people may wonder, what does the EGG plan, of what does it consist of? When I talk about it's a comprehensive plan, these are the components in this comprehensive plan. Everything from what our vision is, the educational vision, to our school scheduling method, to deficiencies that are impacting our middle school building and our instruction, all the way to our dining facilities, physical education, special needs spaces, and security. So there are a lot of components, very comprehensive, that go into writing the educational program. Next slide. And when you look at this too, and through the visiting sessions that Brian mentioned, and what's also included in the plan, are our priorities and what we've highlighted from what we've been hearing from community, what we've been hearing in the visioning session, and then also, at our school committee meetings. And, one that comes through loud and clear is the priority of these academic grade level neighborhoods, because teaming is really at the heart of our middle school philosophy. And within those grade level neighborhoods, the priorities, we talked about classroom centers, for students' own learning, containing a variety of flexible multi-purpose classrooms and spaces to really support groups, small groups, large group settings, collaboration, student presentations. And you can see in the third bullet down, that also includes our STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And that really, what it does is it promotes our 21st century learning through, we call it inquiry, project-based learning, communication, collaboration, and really authentic learning, tying it into real-world learning. Ubiquitous technology, that's, where we need it, when we need it, throughout the school. Of course, safety and security was the main issue of even, accessing coming into the school and throughout the building as well. A big piece of the highlights and priorities that came from the visioning was really this idea of a community connection, and to have these community spaces and access to the community spaces after school, during the evenings, and on weekends. So it's almost like having a separate entrance connected to the school that would be locked down, so community is able to use that after school hours. And that was focusing on the auditorium, which including a music program that is active in both middle schools, in terms of our strings, our band, our chorus, and also our drama program. The dining commons that was mentioned, that should be another part of the school, and our gymnasium. There was a mention of making sure that you connected indoor and outdoor learning, but the learning should extend to the outdoors. And our media center, that's really is the hub of our learning commons. And that is somewhere where our digital learning coaches can continue to work with our students, as well as having a video production lab or studio for continued learning through not only our STEAM, but our art program, and also our news teams, because we have news teams. And then it's also continuing to discuss the potential consolidation. So it's also not only looking at it with an eye of Bird Middle School, but looking at it with our future, that if we were to have a consolidated middle school, and what that would look like in terms of sustainability.
Bridget, this is just that slide from the community forum. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but
Yeah. We have asked, at the community forum, and then also at our visioning sessions with staff, after looking at a variety of designs, what people have preferred in terms of the architectural priorities. And again, you can see, some of obviously the largest group, so to speak, for the answers for the community, are these agile classrooms, these flexible classrooms, being able to move, having flexible desks, wall spaced, floor to ceiling, whiteboards, being able to move from small groups to large groups. And then that community neighborhood, right? Being able those academic grade level neighborhoods, so we can keep this community feel that we've had. Again, natural light, ubiquitous technology, and going on down the line. Community access, again, you can see what I mentioned, that was a good one.
any questions regarding the ed program? I can't see everyone on the way I have my video, so if you have something, just turn your mic off and ask a question. If not, I'll move on and I turn it over to Charlie from Taipei Architects.
I guess I do have a question.
Yep.
We're in a pandemic. I am not confident that we're going to go full time next year, and we don't know what's going to happen. Is Agile Classroom also going to include technology? So Zoom meetings, Google Classroom, what is happening right now. I don't know if it's working for everyone. So I just want to make sure that we're also taking that into consideration for the future, because for some it's working, and let's make it better.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, the technology would be included, and that's a big piece of the plan. It's not only technology within the classroom, but technology within the building as well. So that's that ubiquitous technology. We need it when we need it and where we need it.
So I'm gonna.
Oh,
You
thank-
have to do all that, okay. You're gonna use this time to do that.
Anyone else?
And then you're gonna put that inside of that. Hello. And then that.
Okay.
What is your last name?
I'll turn over to Charlie Hay from TAPA.
Thank you, Brian, and nice to reconnect with all of you virtually. I'm sorry it's not in person, but I'm going to keep talking along the themes that Brian and Dr. Goff have started. Just talking about the general sort of work we're doing in this phase, and as I think Brian said very, very accurately, the preliminary design program, which is this phase, is really mostly about this educational program that the district is working on, which is why the phase is called the preliminary design program. And it's really about fact-finding, which Brian mentioned. So existing conditions, and then looking ultimately at just whether there is a viable site. And those are the things the MSBA wants to know about. They're not so interested in design options particularly, but they're really interested in, as Brian mentioned, how the educational program that the district is developing translates into square footage. So this slide is showing you sections of the MSBA space template. And the MSBA space template is quite defined and prescriptive. It has a whole list of categories, from classrooms to music to maintenance to athletics, and it's probably 100 and something cells long. And what it asks you to do is fill in what the existing conditions are now at the district, what might remain to be renovated, but in fact at the PDP phase we don't do that. They don't ask you to do it until a decision is made on a preferred option, of course, because whether you do a renovated project or a replacement project obviously informs that column. They then ask you for what you're proposing, what the total of that is, and then ultimately what the difference is between what you're proposing and what is in the MSBA's template as recommended square footage. Their square footage guidance, it is guidance, but it is something that if you decide to exceed it for some reason, they would like to have a justification for that. And doesn't mean they'll reject you going over. And likewise, if you go under, they will also ask you to justify why you're under. So they view their template as really the sort of the guidebook to developing what the rooms in the building will be, and what the size of those rooms will be, and ultimately what the size of the building will be. So these are only snips from the actual template. The template is too large to fit on a slide, so we're not showing the whole thing. But let's move on to the next slide.
Right, and we'll include the templates as part of the meeting packet.
Right. Which talks more about as a high-level summary of what we're looking at. So at the birds, so we've developed two templates, okay? There's a bird template and there's a consolidated template. And of course, they're quite different, right? Because one of them is combining your two schools. The other one is just continuing with the separate middle schools, with bird being the one project. For the bird-only project, which has the 450 student enrollment that's been approved by the MSBA. Your existing school is about 81,000 square feet. The template is right now resulting in something that's about 117,000 square feet, which is 36,000 square feet larger than what you have. It also is larger than the MSBA template guidance, which is around 83,000. So we exceed the guidance by something in the range of 34,000 square feet. So you may ask, why is that happening? And it's really happening for fairly specific reasons. To maintain the teams that Bridget mentioned, there are 5 classroom teams, we exceed the MSBA's guidance on classrooms, but their classroom count doesn't take into account even numbers of classrooms per grade. It doesn't, it's simply a formula that the template spits out. The MSBA has always, and I think always will, and has publicly stated that they will continue to support elementary school projects and middle school projects that ask for even number of classrooms per grade. When you get to a high school, it's kind of a different matter. But the way education works at the middle school and the elementary school levels, we really need to have those even teams. The other issues with a larger template include an added music classroom for this enrollment, and I should say these templates change for whatever your proposed enrollment is. We are inserting right now 2 music classrooms into the template based on on Bridget's ed plan. We've added a tech classroom to the template so that each grade gets a tech classroom, which is an important and central component of the ed plan. And we've added a fixed seat auditorium. The fixed seat auditorium, which is a request to date, is not something that the MSBA has for a middle school template. And it is in fact not something that the MSBA reimburses for. And they're very upfront about that. And they effectively say, you may do that as long as it doesn't exceed a certain size, but we're not paying for that one piece. So they back that cost out ultimately of the contribution they make to the project. It's the size of the grant essentially. We are showing right now, based on preliminary discussions, a 300-seat auditorium. And that would either cover 2 grades, or it would cover 2 parents for 1 grade. So if one grade did a presentation, a play, a Christmas pageant, 2 parents could come, or two grades could sit in that auditorium. There's also been discussions about the need for a centralized kitchen, and that is a significant increase over what the MSBA imagines. So that's the high-level summary of why at the moment we exceed the template, and ultimately the committee and the district together will be making decisions on some of these elective spaces, whether they're important to have or not. So that's where we are with that. The next slide shows a consolidated option summary with the 905 students. And interestingly, if you look at this, you begin to see the kind of efficiencies that a consolidated option has. It's a larger building. However, if you look at where you are right now with the Byrd and Johnson combined, you're at 174.5 in terms of size, 175,000 square feet. And the proposed is 172 plus thousand. So you actually, the one building is a little bit smaller than your 2 existing buildings combined. And obviously, the most critical decision facing the community and you as a committee is going to be this topic of consolidation. But clearly, one of the benefits of consolidation is you end up with no more building plus a single building, plus you get the efficiencies of scale and you get the efficiencies that come with less staff, because obviously you're not staffing 2 positions everywhere, you're staffing a single position. So there are a lot of reasons why consolidation can make sense. It may not be the decision you make, but you can see here that it's a fairly efficient option. It still exceeds the MSBA template. It exceeds it by less than the Byrd only option. And it has the exact same kind of topics. The classroom teams exceed the MSBA template. However, they're going to support that, and I think it's absolutely central and vital to the district and to the ed plan to do those teams. The added music classroom, the auditorium, which becomes larger in this case, because in this case we're saying, all right, so if we do 2 grades at 600 seats, right, because we have twice as many kiddos, and 2 parents per student for 1 grade. The topic of the central kitchen is here as well, which is if you want, which has been indicated to be a desire, a centralized kitchen that will service the entire district. That's fine, but it does obviously exceed, the MSBA standard template. I mean, their template is generic, right? It's supposed to cover every single school, and there no 2 templates are the same. Every district has different requests and different needs. The MSBA is very accustomed to working through that with the districts and the project team. We've done many of these, and we always get to a place that the MSBA is comfortable with it. But these, and also a larger gym. The initial conversation was about having a large basketball court, well, large enough to have a divider in the middle and have a, high school sized basketball court, which would give you 2 teaching stations, and then adding a 3rd teaching station as well, which the middle school template doesn't support. And that could be, dance, movement, Pilates, who knows, but some other space so that you could run 3 PE classes simultaneously during the day, which for a school of 905 students with the schedule probably is going to be very helpful. So that's sort of the space template summary. That's what we've been working on in concert with the ED program. The ED program drives the template, but then the template ultimately will drive the design of the building in terms of size. So let's move on to the next slide, if we can. So what is going to happen as we start to put pencil to paper and develop diagrams for these options, and when you ultimately are deciding on an option, which is going to happen not in this phase, but as Brian pointed out, in the next phase, what's called the PSR, which is the preferred schematic report. And that's really where you as a community, a committee, and a district advance your preferred option. So that's going to be driven most largely and most significantly by a discussion of consolidation, whether that's a desire, and then of course by which site is most appropriate and best supports what you want to do. But as we move towards that, there's going to be a series of criteria that are developed, and Compass does a really terrific job of putting together a matrix that really begins to parse out the benefits of various strategies, what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't. But a lot of things will go into it, and we just listed some of the things so you're sort of aware of what's coming. I mean, we'll be looking at, I think, most importantly, and the largest priority, and what the MSBA cares most about, who is funding this, is does the option support the district's educational plan? So the educational vision drives, and from the MSBA's point of view, all, everything. But, we'll look at orientation, we'll look at what happens during construction, how does that impact the existing schools, given that both sites we're considering have a school on them that's operational. How does the proposed building fit on the site? Construction schedule and logistics become important. We're not really getting into that quite yet, but we will, because obviously if you, one kind of approach may add schedule, another may require more temporary measures. So those kind of topics will come up when we begin to look at these options in greater detail. So next slide, please. For now, we're just beginning to do initial concept fit plans. And we started this process, and what you're going to see tonight is new options at the Byrd site and the Johnson site. And the reason you're seeing new options is we're about halfway through this process. We began with really looking at the largest building, because what the MSBA wants us to do is assure them that whatever the ed plan says in terms of a building can actually fit on the proposed sites. So the first thing we wanted to do is make sure we could actually get a consolidated building on the Johnson site and the Bird site. So what you're seeing tonight is new standalone buildings that would replace either the Bird or the Johnson. What we'll be working on in the next week is the addition renovation options, which are actually more complex to develop, take more care because you're trying to figure out how to fit proposed spaces into existing spaces. And as Brian mentioned much earlier, we have two poured in place concrete buildings, which, as we know, can be hard to modify. So it takes it's a little more nuanced. So putting a replacement building on a site can at the initial stage be easier. Our guess is that what you see tonight is not what you will see ultimately, even if we select a replacement building, even if we don't end up going with an addition renovation. These things develop over time, and all we're trying to do right now is go to the MSBA in November and say to them, we've done due diligence on the site. We don't see any problems with either site. We have done test fit plans at both sites to make sure we can fit a building on each site. And the district has developed a terrific ed program, and we have followed that with a space template that supports the ed plan's vision. That's what we're trying to accomplish by November. So these test fit plans are very basic. So what you see here, 1A would be a bird-only replacement next to the existing bird. And 1B would be a combined consolidated school next to the bird. And you can see that these are big buildings, either of them. And we think we can probably shoehorn something in there that fits next to the existing building. It will have to be developed further. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we'll have to look at is whatever the temporary condition is during construction, if this is the approach that's selected. Next slide, please. There's another option for bird only in a combined school. This takes the building and puts it along the property line a little bit farther away from the parking loop, which might help in terms of allowing for pickup and drop off to continue during construction. This shows, and you can see these neighborhoods in these diagrams, right? You can see that team sitting there. And one of the nifty things about the way these diagrams work is that the bird only is 2 teams per grade, which gives you 30 classrooms. The combined is 3 teams per grade. In either of these cases, these neighborhoods could be these grades could be organized horizontally or vertically. They could be 1, 2, 3 stories, or 1, 2 stories, or they could go across. So that's a nice aspect of this kind of plan, and that would give the district some flexibility in the future around how they organize these buildings. Next slide, please. And then here's another concept that puts a big block, the green. So you see those big boxes, those are the green and blue. Those are the sort of support, those are the big box spaces, right? So that's gym, it's auditorium, it's kitchen, it's cafeteria, it's administration. And we need to find a way to create, as Bridget said, that public building that gets used on weekends, that gets used in the evenings, that has an entrance off the parking lot. And this kind of an option is really envisioning taking the old bird school down ultimately and probably putting parking, pickup and drop off in that location, which would probably make a lot of sense. It's already a developed part of the site. It could support those kind of uses. And that's a really typical way of doing these projects, which is to take where the old school was and develop it as parking and roadways. Next slide, please. This is the Johnson site, so all of a sudden we have more room. However, there are other challenges to this site, of course. This would take a lot more site development. We don't have a developed site here. So the cost of that might factor into decision making. But here we have the option 5 is a consolidated school And option 6 is a consolidated school with a slightly different shape, but you're seeing these same themes, which is these big box shapes and these academic neighborhood shapes. And this is really the level you will see when we submit the PDP to the MSBA. What you don't see yet, other than the fact that we are going to do next addition renovation options, what you don't see yet is site plans around this that really develop how driveways might work, how parking might work, how pickup and drop off might work. And again, they will be diagrammatic, just the way the planning is, but they will get developed for all of these plans so that we have a sense that that works as well on the site. Next, please. So that's my section, and again, that this is really the level we get to at this initial PDP phase, which is really test what are typically called test fits, and which satisfy us and you and ultimately the MSBA that we can in fact fit the proposed program on the sites that have been identified. When you get to the PSR, you will be picking which site, and you'll be picking between a bird only and a consolidated. So those will be big decisions, but we are not there yet. So that's, I think, kind of a good summary of the process.
Thank you, Charlie. Any questions before we move on? And you can also send them through the chat feature. I didn't mention that in the beginning, but if you send a question through chat, we can circle back on it. Anything else on concepts before we move on to timeline? Okay. So what's coming up? As I mentioned, it's going to be a busy couple of months, and I think we've touched on a bunch of these different topics. This is something we had put together. We presented this in the July meeting update. Sorry. Back to it. So this is the next few months, and we have two parallel tracks here. The preliminary design program, which we're talking about tonight with the meetings that we're having tonight. School committee is also talking about the program as well. In November, the schedule has, as we talked about on the bar chart, the schedule has the submission of the PDP. So prior to doing that, at the end of November, we need an approved ed plan. School committee is looking to take a vote on that ed plan in early November. And then this building committee will need to actually vote to approve the PDP that gets submitted into the MSBA. And right now that meeting is targeted for November 17th. In parallel to all the work that's going into the PDP that we just talked about, the community and the district are having conversations regarding the enrollment, because that's going to drive, as Charlie mentioned, that's going to drive what options eventually get evaluated to the point that we come out with a preferred schematic, which is due to the MSBA per the schedule in February. So in parallel to the PDP, the district and the community will be talking about enrollment. The school committee's already started that conversation in some of their meetings. They're going to continue those conversations moving forward. We're targeting a second community forum in mid-November as well to get some input from the PDP and also discuss some of the pros and cons of a possible consolidated option. And then the school committee is really driving to make a decision regarding enrollment by the end of November, early December, so that this committee can then vote on possible enrollment options, including a consolidated option or a consolidated path of options, I should say, by the end of December. The goal is that by the end of December, the project team knows which direction it needs to move in, as far as, are we going to look at a consolidated school? Are we looking at a bigger school, or is that off the table and we're only looking at potential a new bird or an ad reno or a reno to bird, because it's going to change how they approach and how they develop those additional options. And then those additional options, as Charlie mentioned, need to get evaluated through a set of criteria that we'll establish with this committee and start to rank options and look at different components of each option until one kind of stands apart and becomes the preferred solution for the project. which then needs a vote from this committee, a vote from school committee, before it gets submitted into the MSBA at the end of February. So there's a lot of meetings, as you can see, that are currently on the calendar or getting put on the calendar that involve not only this committee, but the school committee, as well as reaching out to the public. The select board is targeted a meeting in January or late December. Basically, if a consolidated option is chosen, obviously the select board is going to have to weigh in on what to do with the building that is no longer going to be used as a middle school. That is something the MSBA has asked that the town at least has a preliminary plan of how that moves forward. It doesn't have to be very detailed, but they do have to have a plan in place. In those meetings, we put a brief work plan here of kind of the major milestones and meetings coming up over the next few months. This committee meeting tonight, school committee is doing a workshop on the ED program later on this week. They're going to vote that educational program next week. We're suggesting that this committee meet early November. We picked the 3rd, and that needs to be determined, but we'd like to continue the updates on the concepts, and we'd like to start to identify some of the criteria that the concepts will be evaluated against. Now, obviously, that may or may not change. Those criteria is going to change a little bit based on the consolidated option, but we'd like to have that conversation get started so we know it's important to the town and to the district. And we can start to vet some of those options as we move through the late fall. School committee will meet to endorse the PDP. This committee is scheduled to meet on November 17th to vote and approve the PDP, which then gets submitted to the MSBA by the end of that week. Right now, we've targeted a community forum on November 19th, which will provide a project update as well as pros and cons of possible consolidated options. We'll get comments back from the MSBA after we submit the PDP, and Compass and TAP-A will have to gather responses to any of the questions that they might have regarding the ED program or something particular. Usually it's about the ED program. It's something very specific about a particular component of it, a particular department, or a particular offering. They want more detail. So we'll gather up all those answers and get that back into them. The school committee is going to vote on consolidated options or not, whether to pursue a consolidated option in early December. Right now we're targeting the 10th. And then this committee would want to vote on a consolidated option or not based on the recommendation from school committee by mid-December. And obviously a Board of Selectmen meeting following that. And that allows TAP-A, once a decision is made regarding whether or not there's going to be a consolidated option, TAP-A can move forward to further develop those options, heading towards a preferred solution in February. And that's really it. That's the end of the presentation. We're welcome to take questions. I'm sure there's a lot of information, and I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions.
I had a question on the Johnson site. I had no idea there was so much space out there. I assume most of it's forest. If you're taking into account clearing that, do you have any idea how much additional cost?
No, I mean, at this time, we don't know how much additional cost. We just know that it would, compared to a bird site, which is pretty open, there will be costs associated with that. Again, it's also how that building's going to lay out. It's not atypical to have to clear a site for a building. It's to the extent that site would have to be cleared. But I think just right now, apples to apples, obviously, that would be a cost that would be included on a Johnson project that most likely is going to be included on a bird project, simply because the bird's already cleared.
Are there any other issues you've seen with the land already?
I think Charlie alluded to the Johnson site, just given the topography, and there's quite an elevation change there. I think the concepts that he showed, and I'll scroll back to that, the concepts that he showed show it up on the higher. So this is kind of the existing school and field, and then it's uphill to this location.
Correct. So we're presuming there's a new roadway, new entrance drive.
Right.
So, yeah, I think the answer is yes. There's definitely, I think, a significant cost associated with clearing, grubbing, grading, roadway, extending utilities. And the fact is, the bird site is already a fully developed site. So there's going to be, as Brian said, some sort of differential in cost there. And again, these are the kind of factors that will go into this kind of making of criteria around what you all think is the best option. And the other thing, which is a different matter, but is location in town, and whether the district has a view on which location is better from a centralized point of view in terms of busing, in terms of pick up and drop off parents, in terms of access for students. So that also may become a criteria in terms of decision making.
Correct, and then obviously, given the COVID situation, typically we'd have some type of initial traffic study of the sites. So traffic study will be part of this. Obviously, the Johnson site might have fewer ways to access it. It's all coming down Robbins Road, whereas Bird might be accessible from both the front and the back from a traffic perspective. And to Charlie's point, I mean, one thing that'll come into consideration is the site development costs will be more expensive on Johnson. And something to keep in mind is that is one of the caps on the MSBA's budget is that they do cap site costs for projects, at a certain percentage, 8%. So, again, that's trying to level the playing field across projects, but obviously site cost is something we watch closely. But it's not atypical that, school projects exceed it. Sometimes the school needs to go where the school needs to go, and site costs are the result of that.
And Jeff Fisher, one comment. One of the things about Johnson, just looking at it, it looks like it'd be an easier situation to build while we're still maintaining school.
And that is a positive of the Johnson site, correct? If this is a viable option up here, you're pretty much full operation versus, at Bird, there's going to be some type of temporary or construction impact.
Can I ask another question? Charlie kind of mentioned it in his presentation, maybe about a half hour ago, just kind of talking about operating costs and, a combined situation, reduction in overall operating costs, whether it be, janitorial staff or, where does that come into consideration? And does it?
It certainly can and should. The district ultimately has to look at what they think happens in terms of, FTEs and whether staffing costs will drop. But our experience on other projects is it often does. It's at the margin. I mean, you still need the same number of students, you need the same number of teachers and specialists ultimately. However, in terms of staff, there can be some reductions in staffing costs. And we've often seen reductions in, it's the same number of seats in buses, but bus routes can get more efficient, and there are some other reasons that costs can sometimes be driven down somewhat. You're also you're heating and cooling a single building instead of two buildings. And you have one building to maintain instead of two. So it's a little hard to quantify, but I think it's real. I'm not sure. I don't know, Brian, if you have a way of, and if you've had experience in coming up with a quantifiable methodology to do it. I'm not sure there is one, but it's really part of life cycle costing, ultimately.
I think the school department is looking at, as part of their, analysis of this, the school committee is looking at, efficiencies and trying to do some quantifying around that. I don't know how far along they are, but I think that is part of their analysis as well.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I'm also thinking about the site, and looking at the Johnson site, it really feels to me like the land that you're considering using is high up and in the woods right now. I'm assuming there's a reason that you didn't use the lower down site, and does that have to do with the wells?
There's a wellhead, there's also wetlands, and there's also the matter of trying to access behind the existing school, even just for construction, because it's a pretty, the whole issue of construction access would be potentially a little bit tricky just to get back there. But the thought again was this gave us the opportunity, as someone just observed, to have the building separate from the existing building. But I mean, I'm not sure what the precise constraints on the wellhead are, but I don't know that we can build right on those fields back there. And if we can't do that, we really are forced up the hill. And the other topic here is it isn't just a building and parking lots and roadways. It potentially, if we don't feel like you could access the lower field that exists from that upper site, is whether we need to also develop some play area and some outdoor space. Now, it's true that middle schools are not as focused on that as elementary schools, but that's something else to consider too. So it's quite an undertaking, I think, is the answer. The answer is it's a significant undertaking to consider the Johnson site. It is available, it is something to look at, but I think when we start to see this matrix of options develop itself, and when ultimately later cost gets plugged into it, a lot may be revealed about the merits of this site versus the challenges of this site.
Yeah, I see challenges. Also, I know that it was proposed a long time ago to build an elementary school there. And then it was also proposed to build the police station there. And the neighbors had tremendous issues with both of those, which, is to be expected, I know, but it's just something that would come up. Can I ask about the bird site? When you did your initial concept there, you protected the fields in the back and built closer to Washington Street. Is there a reason that that we're not considering building on the fields and then replacing the fields up closer to Washington?
So the tricky thing about baseball fields and soccer fields and football fields and every other sort of field is their size and their shape. And just looking at this site, you can see that I don't think that you could, if you drew a box around those fields and then tried to place them anywhere else on that site, you would see that they don't really fit. And so it's unlikely that you could string those together somewhere else on the site. And have it fit. But the other thing you would be doing is if you want to replicate them, you're then incurring that cost, right? So all of a sudden we go from just a school project with roads and parking to a school project with replacing 3 softball and baseball diamonds. And so our costs, again, our scope and costs increase significantly as well. So we maybe mistakenly, and you can tell us that that's an important option to look at, we viewed putting a building on those fields as probably not a good choice. And it's also, you also have the other matter of loss of use. So if you have a construction project that takes 2+ years to occur, and then you have natural grass being planted, then you have clearing and grubbing and natural grass being built on fields where there are no fields, even if you could fit them, which I don't think you could. And that takes a year, and then you have a year and a half before you can play on it to adequately establish the grass. You've lost these fields for a long time, and you may decide that that's okay, but it would certainly be something to really think through. But on the face of it, we were thinking we should stay off the fields. we can put a building on the fields if you'd like. That's a nice flat site. We have access to it. We'd be happy to put a building over there, but we're not sure that's what you really want.
I can tell you, having lived through the projects in my former district, I love the fact that you stayed away from the fields and that they're not going to have to be rebuilt, and we have to wait that time for them to be able to be usable again. So thank you for that creativity.
Charlie, could I ask a question? is if there's potential to have road access, from the back, from the, what street is it back there?
East?
East Street. Do you have any idea where an access road might go, sort of, and what's, because I'm guesstimating that might be
We showed something along the property line.
Okay, I see it now, thank you.
Yeah, so that's on so I always get disoriented on this site about precisely where north and south is, but that's kind of the northerly, westerly edge of the site.
Yeah, so Mark, when we did this, we did a survey.
It kind of skirts the outfield of that baseball diamond.
So Mark, when we did the survey, we did a survey to include this perimeter, thinking that that would be the only access. And again, maybe that's emergency access, maybe that's a bus loop, maybe that's back of house parking. One thing to also think about is that the town owns this parcel, which is currently landlocked from Washington Street. It is adjacent and it butts the Bird site. That could be an option for Bird, as a parking lot or a loading dock area or something of that nature. So again, early concepts, just more food for thought.
Great, thank you.
Brian, a couple of questions. Jack Fisher.
Yep.
Way back at the beginning of the presentation, when you were talking about the current Bird School, there was a note in there that said that there were building code violations. Any building that's 15 years old is not going to be consistent with modern standards. But could you summarize what the serious code violations are on the existing school?
Charlie, you may have more detail off the top of your head, maybe, but not necessarily violations, Jack. It's just that obviously it needs to be brought up to code if you're going to do a renovation. So you're talking accessibility, structural, those types of things.
So what the MSBA asks us to do is look at accessibility and life safety, right? So I believe there are some accessibility issues at both schools, and I believe there are and I know that there are probably some at least minor life safety issues, but I think more specifically it's accessibility. It's ADA and AAB that the buildings don't currently comply, which is not unusual. But when you have multi-level buildings, it's hard that are existing. It can be hard to make those changes. So, and if we end up ultimately with a renovation addition option that's selected, the existing building in either the Bird or the Johnson would be brought up to current day code in terms of code compliance as a matter of course. And frankly, I think in either of those buildings, you would see essentially brand new systems, because the MSBA basically says if we're gonna invest state tax dollars in this project, we expect it to be a 50-year building, and the only way to achieve that is to start over really with a lot of the systems. And often buildings that are renovated end up with new fenestration, new roofs. And in fact, it leads to a conversation that we don't know yet what the outcome will be, so I can't say, but you'd be surprised how often a renovation cost is not significantly less than new construction. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, and it often surprises people, but it seems to happen over and over again. And the MSBA completely accepts that, and they've gotten to the point where they say, yeah, we know. Okay. Because there are other reasons renovations can be expensive. So, but you don't know till you get into it.
All right. Another question. It seems that one of the things that's going to be driving the size of the buildings will be the enrollment. And you've had two numbers out there, 905 and I think 450. Does that include population growth? What's the basis for doing those? For arriving at those numbers?
So Patrick, I don't know if Bridget, you guys can talk. You guys did your enrollment projections as part of.
But those real quickly, those enrollment projections are MSBA assigned. So the MSBA does a whole demographic study. Well, the town would do their own, and the MSBA does theirs, and you can kind of they compare them but the MSBA is the one who decides on the enrollment, not the town, based on their demographic studies. So I don't know how it matched up to Walpole's own demographic studies, but when they do that, they look out basically look out roughly 10 years to see what using a bunch of different metrics to see what they kind of predict. It's obviously speculative, but they try to predict what the enrollment will be over 10 years.
Well, where I'm going with this is that we're building a lot of multifamily housing in Walpole, and we're looking at trying to increase the amount of affordable housing in Walpole. And if that's not taken into account properly, then our enrollment projections could be off, and that drives the overall size, which drives the overall cost. So I'm kind of raising this as not as a red flag, but it's something to take into account when we're doing the enrollments. What's actually happening with housing stock in Walpole over the next 5 years?
Yeah, Jack, what we did is in terms of that enrollment, MSBA asked us, any developments, and working with Jim, we were able to get all the developments that were being built or expected to be built, and we had to submit those numbers. So even, for example, with the development out near Boyden Elementary School, we've included those numbers as well. So they took all of that into consideration, and that's where they popped out with that number of 920.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. So next we're gonna get communication out there on the next meeting related to continuing these concepts. We'll target the beginning of November. We can get a polling out there to make sure we have a quorum for one of those days in November, and then we'll move forward from there. The last bit of administrative pieces for tonight is just a quick update on the budget. So included in the packet that'll go out with you with the minutes we send a vendor invoice package, and those of you who might have been on some of the municipal projects are familiar with what this looks like. We send this off every month to the administration and Mike Frisha and Mark Breen regarding all the invoices, all the commitments for the month. Right now, we're just dealing with the feasibility study agreement budget by the MSBA, the 1.5 million. So what will go out tonight are the 4 packets that have been since the last meeting, which is June, July, August, and September, excuse me. And I'll go through September quickly. So the only invoices to date have been from Compass and TAP A. We have started interactions with the MSBA regarding payment requests, so reimbursement requests, and also budget revision requests. So we did execute a budget revision request, which is basically transfer between budget line items from the MSBA's perspective. And we are working with the town to capture warrant information to make sure that our accounting ties out with town accounting. So in this packet, you basically get an overview cover page, which talks about invoices, commitments, anything that has to do with MSBA correspondence, and then how we're doing with tying out the town warrants. Okay. There'll be copies of every invoice that's recommended for approval. We collect them and review them and then recommend approval for all vendors and parties on the project. Okay, thank you. And then we update the budget. So the budget form is really short at this point because it's only dealing with the feasibility study agreement, the $1.5 million budget that you had broken up between the different parties. We've entered in actual commitments to date, so the budget values for Compass, TAP A, and any other expenses. David Stevens was included in the other line item here, and then we're tracking current expenditures every month, updating this every month with what's left in those budgets. So every month you have an updated read on the budget, both from a commitment and expenditures perspective. And also we track all the major contracts. So right now there's 3 of them, Compass, TAP A, and David Stevens. There's been a few other peripheral commitments, but these are the major contracts, and any amendments or anything that will happen against those contracts that are voted on by this committee then will be added to this report. Obviously, if and when we get to construction stage, we'll have things like the contractor and furniture included in this, but right now it's just us and the designer. Any uses of contingency? So right now we're calling, there was a small contingency of that 1.5 left over after you did the designer and Compass. And there was a small transfer from contingency as part of the Compass contract to include the estimate during the feasibility study in the Compass contract. So we moved that from other to the Compass contract per the MSBA. And then also, we track all of the correspondence with the MSBA regarding reimbursement. So this is a printout from the MSBA system, which basically includes all the district's information, including the projected reimbursement percentage, the projected maximum reimbursement grant. This is related to just design costs. And then when we submit payment requests, it includes when that was submitted, the amount that was submitted for, what the MSBA found to be eligible costs, anything that was considered to be ineligible, and then what the reimbursement payment was back to the district. So at the time of this report, payment request number 1 is still being processed. So as we move through that, you'll start to see what the district has received back from the MSBA as part of the reimbursement process. And that's what a vendor invoice package will look like. Any questions? Yeah, November 3rd is election day. A couple of people on chat, so obviously that's going to be a tough one to make. So we'll look for a different day that week. Other than that, that's all we had for a presentation. But we're welcome to answer any other questions that you all might have.
Brian, are you looking for us to vote and approve the invoice payment of the invoices?
Patrick, are we starting with that this month? We want to approve September's and then the other ones in retrospect. Oh,
No,
Patrick.
we're gonna start it after this month. He's off to another meeting.
Okay, so starting, so Jack, now we'll be meeting more regularly. We'll get this vendor invoice package out to the committee in advance, and then we'll approve it at a regularly scheduled meeting on a monthly basis. So these ones have already been approved by Mike Fisher and Jim. Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or if everything's all set.
No, it's a lot of information to review, but we take the time to go through it. Mary Coppins has been instrumental in explaining the whole process and answering any questions that we had. So it's been a good process, a steep learning curve, but very productive.
Great. So with that, we're concluded. So again, one last round for questions, and if not, we'll be in touch with setting up the next meeting for early November.
Brian, can I ask one question, Jeff Fisher?
Sure.
Back to Johnson as a primary site.
Yep.
Would we then be considering 2 unoccupied buildings?
I think it all depends on how that Johnson site lays out, correct? So if you build a new building on the Johnson site that doesn't involve a necessary demolition of that building, then yes, you could possibly have two empty buildings. But again, the Johnson site, you're also going to look at an ad reno option for a combined. So the only buildings that would go to the Johnson site would be for a consolidated option, whether it's an ad reno solution or a new building solution. You're not going to do obviously a brand new middle school there. But it'll depend on how that ultimately lays out.
The MSBA will pay for demo of the building that's been impacted.
Correct.
Not pay for it, but that'll be reimbursable.
Anyone else?
So I'd like to ask if I could for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So I need to poll the committee. Ms. Giositz,
Yes.
Mr. Fisher,
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey Fisher,
Yes.
Mr. Jack Fisher,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Gallivan,
Yes.
Ms. Lawson, Mr. Senek,
Yes.
Ms. Catiato, Ms. Santiago Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Santiago Taylor, thank you.
Yes.
And Dr. Goff.
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Very good. So the meeting is voted as adjourned, and I thank you all very much.